Hey guys, it's Maple here once again, and the development manifesto for the new expansion league already came out, and I spent about an hour and a half going over it yesterday on stream. If you want to check out the full VOD for that, you can, but I just want to wrap up the entire thing in a little bite-sized video about the changes that are coming and the overall view of how they see things at the moment. The big surprise is, or reveal, is that there's more of a focus on like bow and self-cast type builds and skills, and then some of the things they're trying to address with that. Not sure they've entirely done it, but you know, it's an effort. Let's have a look. So the main bulk of the thing is basically the problem they've identified is hit-based spell casting deal too little damage, have too few defensive mobility options when compared with alternates like traps, totems, mine, triggered skills, or damage over time. And should be something you may have noticed. Largely builds are more popular and feel better when they are used as like, you know, attached to a trap. You just run around and throw a trap, or you're cast on critting, or you throw it down as a totem, or you're spell slinging, some shit like that. And yes, the game is currently very unfriendly towards anyone who chooses to, for some dumb fucking reason, stand still and cast a spell or something. And I've been playing Crackling Lance Inquisitor for, I don't know, on and off the past month or some shit like that, and it's very apparent. The game's very unfriendly. The Scourge League mechanic very unfriendly to that, and some of these changes, basically they're giving you about 50% more damage to most spells, will help solve that. But it's kind of funny in that it's just a very PoE solution to this shit, which is to just kill things quicker before they kill you, basically, is the solution. Because they do say more defensive. They currently have too few defensive mobility options, but as far as this is concerned, none of that has been listed or changed. They're just like, all right, so here's a bunch of extra damage and then more cast speed that you have to work towards yourself through gear, which isn't much of a solution. It's a solution, and it helps. So yeah, the mobility thing is just get faster cast speed so that you're locked down for less, so that you kill things faster. It's a weird change overall, given that they listed this, but yes, it's a PoE solution where basically you kill shit before it kills you, and that will make self-casting feel better. So currently the character I'm playing, Crackling Lance, with this change, I felt like my character needed about 30 to 50% more damage just to really feel comfortable against anything I was fighting, and maybe a bit more cast speed, but it needed honestly way more cast speed by default, because I built very heavily into cast speed on my character, and it's still barely good enough to like navigate tricky situations. So anyway, basically, yep, 45% more damage at most gem levels, some even more at higher gem levels. And that's pretty much across the board. So there's a few other cast speed supports being added. Not support gems, like support through rings, amulet, daggers, higher tier cast speed mods. So overall it should feel better to be a self-caster. Not sure it really changes the landscape too much yet, because still doing automated shit is going to feel better. And then they've lowered the damage on ignites to compensate for the amount of extra damage that is happening, which for the most part should be fine, I think. Unleash got a bit worse because everything else got better. So there were just a couple of things that were issues, basically. They just decided to like scrap most of the unique threshold things, which were band-aid fixes at the time to skills. They just went, okay, so now thresholds are gone, and the things that they offered are gone. And some things kind of got it back, and then some didn't. So I'm really not quite sure what this change is about, because they've basically ripped the band-aid off and not fix the problem that was there to begin with for those skills. You still have to like basically fix those problems yourself, and then accept the loss in doing so. You know, the opportunity cost of doing that. So it was, I don't know, bit here or there. I mean, yes, a lot of these things are getting a lot better, and self-casting will feel better for many different things. It's not necessarily the be-all, end-all fix, though, is all I'm saying, but it will definitely make a lot of these much more viable. The threshold dual change is a bit out of left field, I think. Some things got their stuff back, some things didn't. For example, like Cleave now doesn't have, without the threshold, won't get auto fortify, so you still have to build into fortify, which basically is a downgrade. Because if you didn't have to build into fortify and you just got it through the 2 points on the threshold, it was pretty easy and comfortable, and now you have to build like minimum 3 points into the fortify thing, and that's a step back, but it's got like a bit more radius. It definitely needed, but it's taken away from the threshold, so I don't know. And then Glacial Hammer lost its free splash and just fully converts now. Didn't really need that, but okay. I don't know, some of these things are weird. In any case, most things are fine. Orbis Storms is going to be just a bit more single target based, since it's going to strike slower, and still work the similar sort of way before, where you will cast lightning spells and then zap, and probably going to be a good factor into some of your builds. Maybe especially in the staff side of things, since you can have 2 6-links, some shit like that. Armageddon Brand I thought was a weird one. Activates way slower now. Previously 1 second, every 1 second, now every 1.5. I don't get that at all. It gained damage, but then they exacerbated its main problem, which is like the clunkiness of the slow activation and the slow hitting, and more of that. Weird. And then Burning Arrow, for the most part, is, for example, Burning Arrow, also kind of leaning more into its ignite side of things and less of an attack-based thing. So it's really trying to be basically what it currently is more of. So you have to be on the top side of the tree, and it's basically a spell, but you're hitting it with a bow. Just because it's got more mana, it's slower, and it now hits harder, so it's going to be more focused on just pure ignite. It could happen, it could work, who the fuck knows. But all ignites are getting actually, nerfed up top, so this is kind of just like bringing it back. So I don't know, some of these changes are a bit weird for me. And then Explosive Arrow might actually come back in the form of like Bleed Explosive Arrow, something like that. Overall, yeah, look, they tried, and for some things it's definitely going to work. For some things, I don't really get why it happened. But overall, spells will hit harder and self-casting will be more viable, I think. The next issue they identified is one that has been around for a very long time and very true. Hit-based bow attacks require an unreasonable amount of investment to reach competitive levels of damage. Builds that want to achieve that must utilize critical strikes. Many skills can't sufficiently invest in this mechanic without sacrificing defensive options. So typically, if you're going to make like a bow build on hardcore or some shit, it's going to either be extremely expensive, or you're going to sacrifice damage for some sort of life, and then you won't have a very high damage character at all. We're talking about like actual hit base, so like lightning arrow, ice shot, some shit like that, not toxic rain. And the softcore side of things basically just ignore the defenses and just go really fast, really destructive bow builds. And you can't really afford to build into defenses, because then you won't be playing a similar sort of softcore playstyle to other things. And yeah, it's a bit of a problem. So with this, they say improve the damage of bows in general. Some base types getting up to 50% more damage than before. It's pretty big. The elemental damage modifiers are going up to basically what the 2-hand melee modifiers are. So you're going to see bows with these changes at around like 1200 elemental DPS at the absolute high end, and it's going to be pretty ridiculous, I think. So overall, it looks like it'll work, this sort of change, and might be a bit more of a bow meta, but there's just only so many ways you can build a bow character and some of these skills, so it is going to be a bit, it gets a bit boring building that way. So it's not necessarily that much of a bow meta, it just shift you to having a more viable playstyle, I think, as a hit-based bow thing. Improve some mastery things. Quiver's got much better rolls, so they can have higher damage rolls. The additional arrow is going to just happen on all quivers instead of a couple of influenced. Plenty of stuff, but overall, yes, a change that kind of needed to happen, and bows should possibly be a bit more viable early on. This one was a bit of a weird one. Source of added damage, so problem, apparently. Didn't know it was a problem. Don't think anyone else did either. Added cold, lightning, and chaos damage. Support gems provide significant unconditional added damage to our class's many damage options available with some builds, most notably bow builds. By comparison, many other sources of added damage are relatively weak. I don't get it. So basically, added lightning, added cold, yep, you use them in plenty of builds, especially early on, just because it's unreliable to get damage through a weapon, through leveling up, just naturally, and this helps smoothen that curve out so that you're actually progressing with your attack-based skill, more often than not attack-based skill, without needing to upgrade all of the time on your gear, and it's more like, you know, helps you be a bit more in line with how a spellcaster would level, and that's a problem apparently, so it needed to be fixed. It's not a huge deal, like it's not removing the gems by any means, it's not making them useless, you will still use them, but it's like kind of a change that no one, as far as I can see, a lot of the time in the community wants, because they, for the past year, especially with the nerfs, the huge nerf wave, they're complaining about is that you took power away from characters because of the gems and support gems and added it more to gear, and it's like not really that much of a nerf, but it's shifting the power into needing to build your character, you know, in the end game more. So having to craft, having to get the right gear, and then you can still have the same power as before, and that's what a lot of people didn't like, because it's like harder to get to that stage, it's less noob friendly, and it's less of a smooth transition of your build. And this is basically just the same thing for some reason. They're like, oh no, it's just too strong and we think too many people are using it. So tone it down a little bit and then give you a bit more power back into the rolls of your weapons and shit. And it just, once again, emphasizes your gear a bit more, and thus, if you're getting a bit unlucky or you don't know what you're doing as much while leveling, you will have a shitter time progressing. Don't know why this change is happening. Like I said, not going to be the end of the world by any means. They're pretty small modifiers, changes in the end, but it seemed unnecessary. So I'm confused by that one. But that said, the weapons do get bigger modifiers now, and it's just going to create bigger TPS weapons, which is always cool, always fun to see, I guess. You will have like 11, 12, 1300 DPS LE weapons, same with Fizz weapons, and it's going to be pretty silly to see some of those rolls go around. But yeah, weird, but there it is. Hydrosphere. So the problem is that Hydrosphere is basically too good in what it does for some skills as its secondary like attack source. And I personally hate Hydrosphere because of this type of reason. So it is a problem in my eyes that you can have one group of skills that basically get brought up to a high level because of the interaction with Hydrosphere, and then they're much more viable. And then another group of skills that are still kind of shit because they don't have an interaction with Hydrosphere that like doubles their output, and they just get nothing. So then you're kind of left with an entire scenario where you somewhat have to balance around, like your skills need to be balanced around whether or not they can hit a Hydrosphere and then get double an output, and if they don't, then they're just a lot worse, and the balance wasn't really there. So they've changed, like it's weird. They've changed Hydrosphere to have a 1 second cooldown before it can be hit again. This maintains the ailment mechanic on Hydrosphere. So it's still just going to do basically what it was designed to do to begin with, just pulse and bit of damage, ailment, and exposure, but it's now just pulling the floor out, the rug out from under a lot of skills that were using this to be better, and hasn't given them back anything, hasn't buffed any of the skills that need the Hydrosphere interaction. That's it's a change that I would like to see, like making skills and builds more reliant on Hydrosphere, but it's probably not like appropriate enough to make yet, unless there's other changes coming with those skills, because it will make some things a lot worse, like a Frostblade or some shit. You know, you are supposed to attack the target, the Hydrosphere, and then you get the portion of your melee and your secondary projectiles attacking at the same time, essentially giving you damn near twice the output, which is now just like gone, and then you're left with nothing in return. I guess Viper Strike's getting a 5% damage buff. But yeah. Like I said, I think it's a problem, but I'm not sure I see a fix yet. Just taking some of the stuff away. Maybe it's a fix. I'm just too gripped onto the idea that you're killing some of those skills, or rather bring them back down to the worst levels like some other skills. I don't know. Triggering marks. When applied through mark on hit skills or unique items that trigger them, marks are far more efficient for clearing, easier to sustain on boss fights. And then builds that don't have access to these high-end items are disadvantaged in comparison. Completely fair. So your curse on hit, your mark on hit, rings, pretty staple in most builds, and they're very easy to make through harvest. But if you're not getting that particular influence base or the harvest, it's pretty fucking annoying to not have that mark on hit. So it seems like a very good solution, I think. Mark skills are now permanent, so you mark an enemy, a boss, don't have to redo it. Very nice change. Should streamline your self-marking, if you really want to, system quite nicely. And then there's a new support gem, mark on hit. So you just attach your mark to mark on hit, and then don't quite know what the penalty is, but it'll reduce the curse effect, and you don't have to link it to anything else, and then anything you attack with will mark an enemy with this mark on hit. That's pretty cool. You basically have a mark on hit ring built into your gear now, whenever you want it, whenever you need it, and no longer needs to be RNG based. Very nice. And then Deadeye got something that changes, just whatever influence mods have been removed. So you can still get curse on hit rings, but otherwise you just got mark on hit, or you can just self-mark things. So this will make Sniper's Mark on your Deadeye. Mwah! Very good. I love Sniper's Mark. I love Deadeye interaction with it, making it stronger and all that. Now it can be permanent on bosses if you self-cast. We can have a mark on hit support gem, just fucking blasting it out everywhere. Should feel super good. Nice change. Fortification damage reduction. So they fixed half of the problem here. So currently Fortify is like based off of the amount of health that you're basically removing from a mob, so to get to your 20 stacks of Fortify. And it is a problem for builds, melee builds that need Fortify, but don't hit very hard, especially against end game bosses. So we're talking just like bleed builds in general. Doesn't matter how well you've built your bleed build, how good it is, it's still going to struggle to keep up Fortify on the really end game bosses. And they haven't fixed that, but they fixed the half of the problem, which is hitting monsters with high amounts of damage reduction. So Azurite Mine, as you get deeper, they get very thick, and then you're barely getting Fortify. High-end Simulacrum, monsters spawned by certain league mechanics, so things that have these little immunity windows. So they've just changed it, now ignores target's damage reduction. So that kind of helps, but it's still not a full solution, because there's still the other half of the problem of really weak hitting builds that should by all means have Fortify, like a melee bleed build or some shit like that. Should be able to get Fortify, but it struggles to against endgame bosses. So still needs a bit of work, but step in the right direction. Detonate Dead builds, so very, very popular Detonate Dead meta in the past league, especially in the big races and the harder races. Because of Spectre health, we can get a very high health Spectre into your mod pool, and then base your damage off of that thing. And they've changed it, or tried to fix it, by just saying that your Desecrate now have a static 15% chance to spawn a Spectre corpse, one of your Spectres that you have saved, rather than a 2-time relative weighting compared to all other possible corpse types. Not exactly sure how much this kills or doesn't kill it, but I think Detonate Dead in general is still pretty good and should still work out well. It's just not as easy to cheese damage through this really high health Spectre minion and just base an Ignite build off of that. But by all means, does not kill the build or Detonate Deads. So it's an attempt, and it's probably as good an attempt as you can for fixing that meta without killing the entire thing. Seismic Trap, it's an attempt to nerf that as part of the meta as well, because very overpowered for traps and high-end hardcore characters and stuff. Just get some Seismic Traps and, you know, throw them down and big overlap and they do damage while you run around and stuff. They're trying to just tone that down by having the overlap area less overlappy. Don't know if that's honestly going to do much. I think it'll still be viable, and I'm not sure it's going to kill its viability of like real budget endgame. We'll see, I guess, but I'm not an expert on this one. Toxic Rain, once again, bit too strong for other shit. They just reduced some of its damage on the top end. I don't think that kills it either. Something like 20% or some shit less damage. I think the biggest problem with Toxic Rain's overpoweredness is with focused ballistas, being able to like pre-fire and launch a lot of pods on areas, and that hasn't changed, so probably still very good. March of Legion, I don't really have a say in all of this. I didn't fuck around with this type of stuff, or stacking and cancelling and all that, but a couple of things that did change is remove Mortal Conviction, life passives behind the Blood Magic Keystone, and then make it a support style gem. Makes an aura free, prevents you reserving mana. Seems like this could end up being pretty good for just high-end mana builds that strictly like mind over matter, stack mana, and then you can still get an aura. I think if that's how that works, could be a nice little buff there. Change Blood Magic to also grant 10% more life to compensate for the removal of those few life passives behind it, which I think should be a buff as well. It means you don't have to spend those points for those few extra life nodes. You just take the one Blood Magic Keystone and then you get extra life on top of that. I think that's overall a better thing. Supreme Ego, not limit you to one aura, instead give more aura effect based on how much mana an aura reserves. That could just be an actual buff to Supreme Ego if you're like stacking auras and you can afford to somehow squeeze more of them in. Shade Form, the immune sort of Bone Shatter builds from Shroud of the Lightless are being killed. Cooldown to pause while the skill is active. Reduce the cooldown from 45 seconds to 40 seconds. It was broken. It's not intended, you know, for the longest time. Shroud of the Lightless, it's just in a complete afterthought, little physical immunity, and it's fine. It just always is what it is. A little bit of physical immunity sporadically, and some people found a way to make that full permanent uptime immune. It's going away, you can imagine, since it removes the cooldown. It cooldown to pause while skill is active, so it should still have, you know, windows of time when it needs to come off cooldown in between immunity phases. So overall, yeah, makes sense. Strength of Blood Keystone as well. Just made it so you can't stack up to 100% damage reduction through that thing. Dancing Dervish got a little bit of a change, just so that when you hit with it on bosses, it refreshes rampage stacks instead of on kill. And seems like it could be a nice item now. I've never made one of these builds, but I know they're somewhat viable, and this should make it much more viable. It's fucking nothing, no one cares. And then Void Fletcher, it is a bit like, it's a very fun item, but it is a bit one-dimensional. For bow builds, you just go, okay, how do I fit Void Fletcher into my build? Because it's really good if I'm stacking any sort of arrows, and it's pretty hard to go past. So trying to make that somehow different. They haven't quite released how they're doing it yet, but it's fair enough. Yes, it's a fun item. Yes, it's good. Having something good taken away is kind of never too much fun, but if it's still viable, that's good. But you definitely don't want to be in a situation where you're basically always pigeonholed into one item, because it's just a no-brainer of a choice, as it's better than anything else in that slot. In any case, sorry, that actually ended up going much longer than I wanted it to. Started ranting about stuff, but that's the manifesto. Yeah, bit more of a focus on self-cast and bow stuff. Hopefully there's some new skills coming up and some other stuff to sink our teeth into. But that's the game balance as they see it. A couple more days and then we get the full reveal and come on, new skills. And overall should be a very large expansion. Lots of new content, end game stuff. Looking forward to it. Hope you guys are as well. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.